think tonight of a few years ago when I was so privileged to be invited by the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church in Odessa to give a Lenten series. And the first night, just as I was stepping in the pulpit, he came to me and said, we knew each other, so he said, Jim, are you going to do a Jewish talk tonight, or a Baptist, or a Catholic, or a Presbyterian talk? Well, I said, what's the difference? He said, it's the Jewish star. The Jews will say, the Lord my God says. And of course the Baptists will say, the Bible says. And the Catholics will say, the church is always taught. And the Presbyterians say, in my opinion. What has been said already substantiates our last pope of happy memory, whose picture we have in one of the windows there, wrote a beautiful book, I think you referred to it, Rabbi, about suffering and evil. And a lot of the things that he said were powerful and insightful, but at the very end, he said, yet it is all a mystery. It has a semicolon at the end, not a period. There's so much more to try to figure out. My first work on this particular question, how does your faith tradition explain the problem of evil and suffering? I immediately went to the Catholic dictionary definition, and here's what it said of evil. The privation of a good that should be present. It is the lack of a good that essentially belongs to a nature. The absence of a good that is natural and due to its being. Evil is therefore the absence of what ought to be there. That suggested to my thinking the Franciscan presentation of evil and consequently suffering, which comes from evil. They bring out the fact that each of us, when we were created, had some purpose in God's mind for us. To figure that out, of course, is quite a task. But generally, it deals with either sustaining, continuing, or repairing creation. And that includes not only, in our view, human beings that have willpower, can say yes or no to the particular task, but also the angels, those created beings that we claim are have the same thing that we do as far as intellect and will. They can say yes or they can say no, and but they're much more smarter than we are, and consequently, so suffering evil comes when anyone does not, in fact, fulfill what they were created for. And that's, I think, why the definition here is it's the lack of good, the good that could have been done by angels, by human beings, that were given a certain purpose related to continuing, sustaining, or repairing creation. And then consequently, when they do not do that, or when we do not do it, then the debris is there for us all to step in. When we came out of the creative mind of God and through the body of our mothers, made our appearance, we stepped in a bunch of crud that was left by human beings and angels who did not, in fact, fulfill what they were created for. And so consequently, that's about the best way that I can, I take it from the Franciscans. That's particular the way that they explain evil, explain suffering. God gets off real clean on that one. And consequently, it's still, as Pope John Paul II it's quite a mystery.
Thank you. When tragedy happens, traditionally people turn to faith leaders to say, to answer questions, tough questions. Often the question is why? Why did this happen? Why did God allow this to happen? And so as a follower of Jesus Christ and a pastor, how might I answer this question, especially to our folks at our church? And I think about, sometimes I might be tempted to respond by assuming that, well, potentially God just didn't have the power to stop evil. He's not omnipotent, which would actually make God impotent. Or I might respond and say, well, God had the power to stop evil and suffering, but he just was disconnected, didn't care, uninvolved. And I think about the belief of deism, where God just starts the whole thing in motion, and he's disconnected from it. But neither of those is sufficient for me as a Christian. And so I have to look to the Bible to inform my life, and you'll hear me say this again and again tonight, so please don't be offended. I repeat it. I can't define my life based on what I think God should do or shouldn't do, or who he should be or should be. I have to define my life by the authority of Scripture, because for me as a believer in Jesus Christ, the Bible is the authority of my life. So when I think about that, and we walk with our folks through suffering, we think, what does the Bible speak to concerning evil and suffering? And really it doesn't answer the question why. It answers the question, what do you do in response when evil and suffering enters your life? And I think of the book of Romans chapter 8, verse 28. It says this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And so I think from my faith tradition as a Christian, I would say two things are a reality when you confront evil and suffering. First and foremost, that God is at work in all things, and he runs the show. And regardless of whether he allowed something to happen or directly caused something to happen, from the Christian perspective, either God is God, and if he is, he's in control of everything. The difficulty that brings into our life is that, do we trust him when evil and suffering comes into our life, even in those moments of tragedy? And for a believer in Jesus Christ, you have to say, I would have to say to them, do you trust that God is accomplishing his purposes even in the most tragic moments of your life? And that's a difficult decision. But that is the heart of how we would explain evil and suffering. And the reality, I think, is, at least from our faith perspective, it's not always a satisfactory answer, because I think, especially in America, we want a God whose first priority is our needs and our purposes and our direction and our plans, and yet we surrender to the will of a God who is in control of everything. So that's how I would answer that question. Thank you, Pastor.
I kind of what they said. I wish there were an answer. I wish there was something that makes clear and understandable, something that gives a reason or a cause for suffering and for pain, for that reality of evil. I think it's probably the single most significant intellectual and personal struggle that folks have who believe in an all-powerful and loving God. And I'm aware of no satisfactory explanation in the sense of an explanation. Some human evil makes a little bit of sense in terms of free will. We're free to do things, and that's part of an answer, but that just touches the surface. And the fact is, I simply cannot see the God and Father of Jesus Christ spending any of his time hurling automobiles into each other's, passing out cancer cells, striking folks with lightning, creating tsunamis and earthquakes, things like that. And a divine plan that is so mysterious as to be incomprehensible is no more helpful or consoling than no plan at all. And I think that suffering and evil are simply brute facts of the world, facts that are as inexplicable as they are undeniable. It's just the way it is. And so I don't think we can find meaning, purpose, or hope for our lives or our world if we demand the the experience of a just universe. Or if we try to connect our faith, our actions, and our hope for the way our lives will play out to some sort of divine reciprocity, the universe is not organized around us. On the other hand, I think that Christianity has at least 3 important responses, not answers, but responses to the problems, the horrible problems of evil and suffering, not explanations. The first is simply that we are not alone in our suffering. God in Jesus has experienced human suffering and is with us and knows what it is like and will not leave us abandoned. And the second thing is like unto it. In his presence with us, God is able with our cooperation to redeem suffering and evil, to bring something new and whole out of the worst that can happen. But remember, this is not an explanation. God doesn't go around causing suffering, so he'll have something handy to redeem. But God can bring a new thing from evil and suffering that happen. And third, and with the same caveat, evil and suffering are a call to us to reach out, to minister, to serve, to care, to know, and to respond. They are an occasion for us to discover and to serve the presence of God in the face of our neighbor. But none of these explains or answers why.
Thank you.
I'm sure that everyone has heard the book written by Dr. Rabbi Harold Kushner, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? One of the most vexing obstacles to faith in God is undoubtedly the problem of suffering and pain. And I'm going to turn to my good father and say that I'll quote from St. Augustine, a very interesting, almost a paradigm. He said, and he was a great Christian teacher, theologian, as he put it, either God can prevent suffering and does not do so, in which case he cannot be good, or he wishes to prevent suffering and cannot do so, in which case he cannot be omnipotent. Those characteristics and those qualities certainly don't jive with our recognition of a benevolent God and an omnipotent God. But the rabbis, many centuries before Augustine, discussed this problem of why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. And there are biblical books that deal with this as well, in the Hagiographa. And especially, it would be true to say that any thinking person has been puzzled by the mysterious ways in which God moves ever since people began to believe in the existence of a benevolent creator. In fact, it goes so far back as Moses himself. There's one reference extrapolated from the scripture itself by the rabbis, who, after the sitting of the golden calf, and this was only a short time after the revelation and theophany at Mount Sinai, the people just fell into an abyss of almost paganism. And it was then that Moses turns to God, according to the imagination of the rabbis, and says, God, show me your ways. And at that time, God put him in the cleft of the rock and said, you cannot see me, because no person can see me and live. But let me keep you here and protect you, and then you will see my back. Meaning that we can't foretell what happens to us in life. However, we can, just as a ship that goes through the ocean leaves a wake, and you know that a ship is passed, then you can consider and contemplate the issues that are before you. So that we have so many questions about believing in the benevolent God. When we see doctors pitting their skills against destructive diseases, and when we we see statesmen struggling to prevent war, social reformers fighting to clean up the slums in the inner cities, to combat misery and squalor and homelessness. And then after the earthquake and the tsunami, and then the meltdown of the nuclear reactors in Japan. And we know that those who tried to bring help to those who were trapped and maimed in the debris, crushed and dismembered, were confronted by this burning question. Shall mortal man be more just than God? Question asked in the book of Job. And shall a man be more noble than even his maker? Now, how can so much suffering and evil be allowed to exist in this world? That's the question that confronts us by a benevolent God. And we say, some people say yes, because it has been said, the pain is punishment for sin. Now, that's not something that everyone will buy. And so another reason is given that pain is not evil, because it serves as a warning. And we know that in diseases and the struggles of doctors to try to assess and to analyze events that go on. And there's no one here, I'm sure, who doesn't know anyone who has suffered from debilitating diseases, cancer, and destructive things that even come to us natally.
Amen, Rabbi.
Yeah. And there is no extension of pain, another one says, because the depth and strength of pain can only reach a certain height and density. And if we say that the whole world is full of human misery that is compounded, pain cannot be compounded. The most that any one individual suffers to the nth degree is the most pain that there could be in the world. Now let me just tell you and conclude with this story, because there's no real answer that we can give excepting that using the suffering and the pain that we have, we can be of assistance to others. When we appreciate our own anguish, our anxieties, and our feeling of almost helplessness, then sometimes a spirit of help and succor seizes upon us, and we want to extend our hand to others who may be suffering. The Hasidim tell a story of famous two brothers, Schmelke of Nikolsburg and Pinchas of Frankfurt, who put the following question before a great rabbi. It is written in the Talmud that man must thank God for good things as well as for the bad. Is not that asking too much of man? Who would have the strength to praise God for being punished? And the answer that was given was not really an answer. You know, every Jew who is asked the question answers with another question or a direction. And so the rabbi said to him, go and have a little chat with Zusha. Zusha was well-known in that community, and everyone there knew that he was sick, burdened with countless miseries and ailments, and he was spared nothing of sickness. And when he came to him, he said, Zusha, how can you thank God? What about your suffering? My suffering? That's Zusha. Who's suffering? He asked, amazed. Not I. I'm happy. Zusha is happy to live in the world that God, blessed be He, created. Zusha lacks nothing. He needs nothing. Everything he wants, Zusha has, and his heart is filled with gratitude. The answer to the question is, he didn't even understand the question. And perhaps that's an attitude that each and every one of us can also take when things happen to us. Everything happens for a purpose. Let's realize that purpose, to extend a helping hand to others. And the greatest things in the world have happened as a response to this question.
Thank you.